Tēnā tātou katoa, we seek wisdom, understanding, insights into the views and circumstances of others, strength to seek what we believe in, humility to accept the combined decisions of others, patience, good humour at all times, tolerance and courtesy while working in the best interests of our community. Welcome along, everyone. We have an agenda in front of us that I won't say will take a short period of time because that will jinx it. We've got some important items on that agenda, but areas that I don't think would necessarily require prolonged debate. Can I first of all check for apologies? I have apologies from Councillor Chris Darby. Councillor Darby is at a funeral, a family funeral. Are there any other apologies being received? So I'll move that we accept the apology from Councillor Chris Darby for absence, seconded by Councillor Desley Simpson. Those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no, carried. We have a request for electronic attendance under Standing Order 3.3.3 for Councillor Greg Sayers. I'll move that we approve that request. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wayne Walker. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Are there any matters on which any member needs to make a declaration in terms of a potential conflict of interest? No, thank you. We have the confirmation of minutes, and I'll move that we confirm the ordinary minutes of our meeting held on the 25th of March, including the confidential section, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Cashmore. Are there any matters arising out of the minutes? If not, I will put confirmation. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no, carried. We have no petitions, and we come now for public input, and we have a request from the Maritime Union of New Zealand to speak on the issue of health and safety at ports of Auckland, and that's an item that's on the agenda at the moment. So I think Russell Main, is Russell? Yeah, Russell, please come forward if there's anybody else that wants to join you for that. Sorry. Okay. Welcome along, and you'll be aware that we provide under standing orders that there's usually 5 minutes set aside for you to make a presentation, and then we usually take up to 3 questions which are relevant to what you are putting in front of us. You can take less than 5 minutes and leave a bit more time for questions if you prefer. That's entirely up to you, but welcome to both of you, and look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for allowing us to come and make this presentation to the Council. It's an interesting time we're at the moment, and I think we're on the cusp of possibly making the workplace at the ports of Auckland a far, far safer workplace. And that comes from our membership. A big thanks to the Council and the Mayor for providing the report and the 45 recommendations that come out of the report, because without that, it would just be business as usual in that port, and our members would be going to work in a far, far more dangerous position. So with that, I guess our concerns is in regards to the commitment of POAL in making those and fulfilling those recommendations of the Health and Safety Report, especially under 2.0.5. which states that POAL do accept responsibility for their workplace culture and are working to improve it. The difficult relationships between Maritime Union of New Zealand and POA has at times hampered health and safety improvement. For health and safety to continue to improve at POAL, it is essential that all parties work collaboratively to support health and safety. Look, it's very simple. The union has always been willing to collaborate in health and safety, because it's the primary function of a union is to make sure that its membership works in a workplace that is healthy and safety. up until that report, that did not happen at the ports of Auckland. And I think the report makes that very clear. It's very difficult for us to work in a collaborative fashion when all the work that the union has done in health and safety, and that is bringing in experts from Australasia, that's New Zealand and Australia, to come in there and give recommendations in their field of expertise, has been ignored by the port company. So going forward, of course, we're willing to, at delegate level and at official level, to engage with management and to engage with the experts and assist in advice. And we think we've got a real role to play there, because both myself and Craig just sitting here, there's probably, we're getting a bit old in the teeth, there's probably nearly 70, 80 years of experience just sitting here in a workplace that up until 6 or 8 years ago did not have these fatalities. Certainly when I started there as a young man, I think I only experienced one death in 30 years. And, that was a tragedy. So there is a number of recommendations in that report. And for those recommendations to succeed, we believe that the union has to be party to designing the fix to it. So that means we've got to be in at ground level and right the way through and putting these in place. Unfortunately, what we see at the moment is that it's still a very much top-level driven down policy and how they're going to deal with the recommendations, and we think that will fail, and inevitably that will be at the cost of the workplace. So it appears that the POA has already developed a high-level plan for the implementation of the 45 recommendations in the review. That will be a challenging report to do and to put in place, yet the range of expertise that's required, I think, to address that hasn't been put in place at the ports of Auckland. It's just the same way of doing things that was done over the last 8 years. So, I mean, even despite the report having been released, I think, some 4 weeks ago, the health and safety manager down there, we haven't even met with you yet. And I would have thought that would have been one of the first things that's happened, especially given the criticism of both the port company and the union in the report of not being collaborative and working together. So I would say as yet, I haven't seen management at the ports of Auckland engaging in a positive fashion to fix this. The request from the union is that an official be put on the health and safety committee down there at the beginning to guide through the process and get this into work, and to be involved from the very grassroots in designing the policy to fix this. This hasn't happened. To date, that request has been refused. We will be meeting with the Ports of Auckland Health and Safety Manager tomorrow, and they are going to provide a draft of the plan. It's a very different process from worker engagement. POAL should have discussed this plan in depth with the workers and the representative of those workers at the workplace to have a successful one. In summary, really, MUNS is committed to engagement with the POAL, but it still appears to be a very much a management-driven down approach to health and safety from where we're sitting. So I don't see too much has changed, but the positive is, and it is a real positive, because the review that this council got the Ports of Auckland got Chairs New Zealand to undertake has meant that for the first time in 10 years, I think we've got a real chance of making the Ports of Auckland a safe workplace. And if we get it right, there won't be any more deaths, and I won't have to sit here and discuss health and safety, and I won't have to go back to my membership and listen to them say what's going on down there. But that won't happen. And trust me, it won't happen if the same top-down driven answers to health and safety are there, because it will always be that operational overrides health and safety, and that can't go on. And the report's very clear on it. That's my view. I don't want to take up all your time. I don't know.
We welcome the council getting that report. But we note, like, just a couple of weeks ago, there was another accident at the port where a port worker is still off today, and that was a young worker who was working as a leading hand on the ship, went up through a walkway on the ship on a gangway, on the walkway, stepped back on a closed hatch. That hatch gave way, fell through about 1.5 meters maybe, and it was put in as a minor accident, but still a lost time accident. So, like Russell said, that whole culture's got to change, because we're actually involved in ports right around the country. And for instance, Littleton Port, Port Chalmers, and they have a high level of engagement, but they have a lower level of incident accident rate. So it's not about stopping the job, it's just making sure everyone goes home. So, yeah, that's about it.
Well, thank you very much, Russell and Craig, and for that input. And very clearly, this council is committed to things not being done in the same way. The report is absolutely clear. We have a paper in front of us where we make certain requirements of the ports, including reporting in public to us. And we've added to that a new request that Chasms provide an audit of their implementation of the recommendations and report to us. That's a chair's recommendation today. Report to us in October to ensure that what they've recommended is being progressed and is being carried out in the appropriate way. So we're very serious about health and safety. What we did was, I think, probably unprecedented in the life of this council. I'm not sure whether I overstepped the mark or not, but what we did, and we collectively and unanimously agreed to do that, I think was important in turning around the situation, Russell, that you described, which is quite inadequate. I now have the 3 questions that have come up, so I'll take those questions now. And the first question is in the name of Councillor John Watson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. Have to say it's a little concerning, some of the things you've said. Policies and engagement, of course, are only good as the people that are leading them. And certainly from my perspective, I'd like to know what are the specific roles or positions or membership that you think the union's representatives should have in terms of actually effecting some change here. So you mentioned one of the groupings there. What are some of the committees or groups that you think you should be on that can actually inform this whole process rather than just be individuals at the end of the management rod?
Look, it's a very good question. And I think there's 2 that's very important. And I think that one, we should have been right at the very beginning in designing the draft plan to implement the recommendations, because the basis of the implementation of the recommendations is going to prove whether they're successful or not, or whether they're logical in the workplace. Because you have to have a balance when you're making recommendations in a workplace like that. You have to have your hat on, I guess, of the company and a health and safety expert, but you also have to have the hat on as a worker and those people who know the dangers out there and know how to fix those things in a practical sense. You can, if you put a foreman on a ship who is in charge, you can prevent an accident. But if you have that foreman on another platform, you're inviting an accident. So it is, look, it's a real concern to us that I'm going to go to a meeting tomorrow and be presented with a draft documentation on the implementations. That means if I don't agree with it, I've got to fight every point that's in the document. And you all know how hard that is as a group of councillors. A lot different from being there at the inception of the document, where you put the document together in a collaborative process. And that's what I think the recommendations of that said to do. The second thing is, why would, if you're a company that's saying that you want to engage in the workforce and you want to bring health and safety back to the prominent position at the workplace, why would you refuse to have a union official on your health and safety committee? Doesn't make sense to me, people, it really doesn't. All it says to me is, we don't want to engage with you, we'll do that as window dressing, but in the end you don't belong in a position where you can affect change in health and safety.
Thank you very much. And the report was very clear that there needed to be an improved relationship from the port's management and board with the union to implement that collectively, and that's what our expectation is. Councillor Cathy Casey.
Yeah, thanks for coming along today, Russell and Craig. This is very disappointing to hear. This council heard from the reviewers about the dysfunctional relationship between union and management and suggested that everybody put aside their differences for the sake of a new era, looking at the safety of our port workers. I thought that was going to happen. Indeed, I heard that was going to happen from the Chief Executive and from the board chair at their press conference later in the day after the mayor. So my question to you is, what efforts has the union gone to get management and the board involved in matters at the port?
Yeah, again, another good question. Look, I think let's start. You know, our union has a very proud history, and it goes back 150 years. And for the first time in our history, we sent an invitation to the chairperson of the board and the board to attend the special stop work meeting in regards to the health and safety report, so that our members could present to them in a proper fashion, because our meetings are held in a proper fashion under the rules of debate, what was the contents in those report. Unfortunately, the board never turned up, they never responded and never even told us they weren't coming. And it's a big call for a union to invite a chairperson and a board to their stop work meetings. It's not done casually. Secondly, following that, I have again tried to engage with the chairperson and the board. I've sent them a letter asking for an urgent meeting. I think it's some 5-6 days ago. And I still haven't even received a reply. I wouldn't mind if the reply come and said no, but not to even receive. So why do I doubt the sincerity of the board? I guess I can't say it any better than that. If I don't receive a reply, why would I think that they're going to engage with us in a profitable fashion?
Thank you for that. I think I'm happy to make a call to the board to suggest that the engagement with the union would be very positive in terms and within the spirit of the recommendations. As you'll be aware, one of the people that we've just appointed to the board, which we did after seeking advice from the Council of Trade Unions, is a person that has particular expertise in this area and would, I know, have a strong desire to engage with you. And I expect those sort of meetings to take place if we are to achieve what the recommendations said, which was a more cooperative relationship between the two sides. There shouldn't be two sides on health and safety. There should only be one side. Anyway, last question is from Councillor Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore, and I've just received one further, so I'll take a final question from Councillor Fletcher after that. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks. My question is exactly the same as Kathy's. And your perception, Mr. Mayor, about the newly appointed director who's a health and safety expert. Have you put your suggestions to that board, newly appointed board member, as sort of it's where expertise lies? Have you done that, or has gone straight to the chair?
I addressed the letter to the chair because, you know, really the responsibility relies with the chairperson, doesn't it? I don't think it would be at all the right conduit as individual letters to the board members. I mean, that's the position that you're put in as chairperson, is to lead the board and to take the board into the future and respond to those recommendations. So I think that's the appropriate place that the letter went to.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just trying and progress this forward. And I think that would be a good move, maybe, to help talk to her directly. And I'll certainly be phoning the chair of the board this afternoon.
Okay, I think we may be able to facilitate it. We're not in a position to direct the board, but we can make suggestions to the board, and a cooperative approach certainly is consistent with the whole thrust of the Chasn's report, and I'd expect that to be happening. Last question this time from Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming today. I want to know from you, and I am very mindful of the legislative restraints and other issues that can provide obstacles, but what is it you expect from us as a governing body on an ongoing basis in terms of monitoring? And I ask you that question in the context of my late father was on the harbour board, and he was also the manufacturer of, through Lee's Industries, of a lot of equipment. And he used to regularly sit down with the union because he knew the complexity of the equipment that was being used. And so when I read Roger McRae's report, and I realised just that lack of knowledge on what was actually required with the equipment and the risks, the inherent risks there, I was genuinely shocked. So I want to know what my obligations are sitting here today, what your expectations of us are, even though there are complexities in the way that the legislation was crafted. As a union, what do you expect from us in terms of monitoring what goes on at the port?
Well, I guess it's not only as a union, but it's a ratepayer as well. Look, we're very clear in what we think the council. We understand the restrictions and the constraints that the council is under because of the legislation. But what we think that's appropriate is that when the council asks the questions of the senior manager at the port company in regards to the performance of the port company, not only in the areas of health and safety, but also in how the port is run, then the port company should be giving the answers back to the councillors so that the councillors are informed. Because unfortunately, I don't think you are getting the right message back from the company, especially in regards to automation. If I was sitting on the other side of the table here today, I would be extremely concerned about the performance of the port company. I would be extremely concerned about the amount of money that has been borrowed to implement automation. And you understand the complexities of getting the right equipment in there that fits into the slot. And at the moment, the performance of the port company as far as box rate and that, I'm not even sure you're getting the relevant information. I mean, our union has taken a step to try and confirm the validity of the box rates that are being put across out there in the public arena, because to tell you the truth, I don't believe them. I don't think they're accurate. But so that's what all we can ask from you is to monitor the performance of the ports of Auckland as a union and make sure those decisions that are being implemented are logical and suit the situation of the port. And as far as health and safety are concerned, is that you have a board who has members on the board, because that's where you do have an influence, and you've already started that with the appointment of Hazel Armstrong, and you know that is a very positive step. But that's where you do have an influence of who's on the board and who leads that board in the direction that the company will take going into the future.
Thank you, Russell,
That
and thank you.
practical expertise, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Russell, and thank you, Craig, for that. I'm going to move that we receive the input from your union, and to thank you for expressing your position. And it's not in the resolution, but also to acknowledge that this is a concern that you have raised over a period of time, and we acknowledge that. Councillor Casey is seconding that vote of thanks. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. I declare that carried unanimously. Thank you for appearing before us today, and we will try to facilitate and to encourage that cooperative attitude between the port management, the port board, and yourself on health and safety. That's critical in my view. Thank you very much. Councillors, we now, there is no public input. We come to extraordinary items, and I've been advised by Councillor Chris Fletcher that she wishes to raise an issue which she and I and Councillor Casey and others have had a chance to discuss. So there is action being taken on that, and there is a memo that I've sent out this morning. Hopefully you've read your emails this morning, and a fairly full explanation of our options from Megan Tyler. But I do want to give Councillor Fletcher a chance just to speak to the item, and then Councillor Casey briefly, and then I don't think we probably need to make it an extraordinary item, but we do need to make sure we're acting on it with a sense of urgency. Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. Since I approached you on this, I've been very pleased to see Megan's input in terms of the information that has been provided. But for those of you who are not familiar with this tree but might be familiar with Mount Eden, if the Mount Eden Bowling Club, which is a sort of iconic building along Stokes Road, is in your mind, you will perhaps recall that there is a magnificently framed Pahutakawa tree that sits behind it. That is the tree at 8 Eglinton Avenue on a private property that the Legacy Auckland City Council thought noteworthy to actually record under the scheduled trees. My understanding, without going into a lot of detail, it was just a clerical oversight that saw it not put into the unitary plan as a notable tree. The current owner, I think, has been there since 2015, and he purchased knowing there was a scheduled tree on that site. However, it is now clear that because of however that happened, whatever oversight there was, there is no protection on that tree at the moment. I think we are at a really important time when the credibility of Auckland Council when it comes to tree protection is most important. And so for such an oversight to occur, there would be, I can't tell you the drama that would ensue if that tree was chopped down. And right at the moment, there is nothing there to protect that 100-year-old Pahutakawa from taking place. Now, I know that Megan Tyler is one of our most hardworking directors, and she is doing magnificent work in that area, and she's probably really alarmed on the precedent that this potentially might set, because of some other 570 odd trees that probably fall into this category, not necessarily because of error, but because of what we now know of the noteworthy characteristics of these trees that are really important to Aucklanders. But I've been following this since January, and as the former sponsor of the Tree Council's private members' bill on tree protection, I acknowledge that Mark Lockhart, who sits on the Tree Council and is a landscape architect, has done some incredible work behind the scenes. He's received legal advice on it. I'm heartened by the advice that we have now received from Megan Tyler. So it's for that reason I have brought it to your attention today. It might be to you not a matter of extraordinary business, it just relates to one tree, but it's symbolic to me of the importance of trust that our community have in us, that we are monitoring those things that they hold dear. And so as the Legacy Auckland City Council saw it noteworthy, I commend it to you. I realise the practicalities around this, and it will be interesting to have Megan or Jim Stabeck speak to us. I also understand the financial constraints that the council is currently in, and as I've already alluded to, the additional 570 odd trees that we would like to actually, when we do a review of notable trees, we would like to see scheduled. But for me, this is drawing a line in the sand to say that we respect our community and we respect those things that they hold dear, and we must correct this oversight. So I thank you for your indulgence, Your Worship, for allowing me to raise this. As much as I would actually like to see something recorded today, maybe a resolution, and empowering our officers to act on this, because right now, even if we embark on this process, as the note from Megan will have informed councillors, maybe it's going to require an injunction, because there is nothing legally to stop that landowner actually getting his chainsaw out today and actually chopping it down. He will be quite entitled inside his legal rights to do that. And I think that would be a travesty. So, Your Worship, I'll hand it back to you. And if we are to deal with the matter, I would like to feel that we have some resolution to give comfort to those of us here today who have concern over this matter.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Just before inviting Councillor Casey to speak to the item, I had a discussion with Jim on Monday of this week where I found out about what the problem was, and I've had subsequent discussions with Megan Tyler. My view was very, very clear. this is a magnificent tree, and there is no one here that would want to see this tree destroyed because a clerical error was made that meant that it failed to be listed in the schedule of trees when the Auckland Unitary Plan was introduced. The memo that you've all got sets out all of the options that we have, and the undertaking we have already from Megan Tyler is that she will come back to us as soon as the work is done so that we can make a decision about the option that we want to follow. My view is that this will, because of the error, unfortunately involve some costs, but it's equally my view that you cannot allow a tree of this heritage nature that we've already scheduled once to be destroyed inadvertently. That is not an option from my point of view. And for the councillors that I've had a chance to discuss this with earlier in the week, and there's probably been, probably got through to 8 or 9 councillors on it, that view is shared by others around this table. So the reason I'm suggesting we don't need to make it an item of extraordinary business is because we are now taking the action that is necessary. There is urgency around that action, and in the memo I've sent to you is it makes it clear that I want a recommendation to come back to whatever committee we can put this in front of as quickly as possible to take that action. So I don't want to duplicate all of the discussions that we've had already, but Councillor Casey, would you...
Your Worship, just on that though, before you take a further call, could Mr Stabeck give me the reassurance that he has the authorisation and his staff and the delegations that are required to ensure that that tree is not chopped down?
Jim, would you like to answer that, or would you prefer to have Megan come to the table? Maybe Megan, you've done the spade work on this. What I can say in answer to you.
Point of order, Mayor. There's someone just filming and taking photos, and I don't know if they have permission to do that.
I'm sorry, that's not permitted under standing orders. So could you please put the camera away? What I can assure, thank you for drawing that to my attention, Councillor. What I can assure you is that we will be giving urgency to do everything we can to stop the potential destruction of this tree. At the moment, no resource consent has been entered into to develop the property. The property owner has been approached, and that's appropriate as the first step. But because of an inadvertent error, we are not going to see the destruction of this tree. But Megan, you might like to just speak briefly to the options. We will go through this in a formal council session, so I don't want to spend a long time on it, but if you can maybe just outline, without repeating everything in the memo that's gone to every councillor already, if you'd just like to comment quickly on the councillor's question.
The question is specifically around, does she have sufficient delegations to be able to act?
And the answer is yes. But Megan, you should answer that yourself.
Thank you, through you, Mr Chair. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Yes, we do. However, depending on the options that we need to take, for example, a plan change, that would need to go through the normal resolution process through the Planning Committee, which is the usual committee. So I absolutely have delegation to act now, as per the memo. There may well be, depending on the advice I come back to you with, there may be some further delegations, resolutions that you need to make as a council around that.
So if a chainsaw was produced today and an injunction was required, you have the delegations?
Yes.
Thank you.
Finish with a quick comment, Councillor Casey, if you'd like to add to that, as the other ward councillor.
Oh, there's just two people I want to thank. One is Mark, and Councillor Fletcher's already mentioned Mark, but it takes an individual in the community to not just bring something to the attention of the council, but to challenge the council. And Mark did that, and so we owe him a great debt of thanks. But the other person definitely I need to thank, and there's, we're just about to go into the review, and I'm always be indebted to the Mayor for instigating that to prevent another death at the port. But you saw immediately that a mistake has to be sorted. We make mistakes, and it's not up to the community to have a petition and fundraise for legal action. It's up to us to put it right. And hats off to the Mayor. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you very much, Councillor Casey. I'll get the microphone right. I'm now expecting the next step is that Megan will report back to us, and probably at the Planning Committee, on the most urgent way forward, an effective way forward to rectify that mistake without putting at risk the tree in question. This is not just an ordinary tree. It's a tree we've already recognised as deserving to be scheduled, and it is, for anybody that's seen it, a magnificent tree, and we do not want to see the destruction of that tree. I think that probably sums up what most of us think. I'm reluctant to take further calls on it, but a quick comment,
Thank
Councillor.
you, Mayor. I guess just the legal side of things, I just wonder if we can take any of the, I imagine there were resolutions from 2013 or 14 when it went through that says the intent. There might be a way we could look at that. And the other thing is, are there other ways, because I know the legal process takes a while, to work alongside the landowner in the short term, without putting legal things. Maybe the owner doesn't want to necessarily cut it down right now and we're assuming things, but there might be quicker ways to work while the legal process takes its course.
Yeah, and that's precisely why the first step that we took was to get somebody to approach the landowner who has been non-committal at this stage. But look, I acknowledge the rights of the landowner and because of the mistake we made, but equally acknowledge there'd be public outrage if somebody were to take preemptive action to destroy a tree whose protection has been removed only because of an administrative error, and which this council has acknowledged needs to be preserved.
But just on the question of the error, are there precedents in the past where a decision has been made, the intent, say in court, has been shown, but or have we actually missed the legal requirement? Because I imagine if it was in documents in the unitary plan 6 or 7 years ago, whenever the decision was made.
I don't know whether Megan's got an answer on that now, but she could certainly ask legal and come back to you. Did you want to comment on it, to Megan?
Through the chair, look, it wasn't in the unitary plan, but it was in the previous legacy plans. So look, we have looked at that. Be assured that we're looking at all the various options. It's not quite as simple, unfortunately, as being able to just rectify a mistake under the Resource Management Act. But I appreciate your questions. I know where you're heading with it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Your Worship, just one short question to conclude the item. Megan or Jim, in whatever report comes back to the Planning Committee, will there be some analysis of the other trees that I've referred to earlier? And secondly, I'm really remiss, Jim, in recognising Melissa Bidouar and also James Stevens, who did such an amazing job from Democracy Services in enabling us to bring this item today. They don't often get the recognition they should, and they have done an outstanding job in highlighting this without actually attacking officers, but just bringing it forward in a healthy way.
That is in the memo, but you might like to briefly sum it up, Megan.
Thanks, through the chair. Yes, we will. Normally that would take ages and ages of work, of time to do, but we're taking sample, we're getting a sense of it. I'm very happy to bring that back to you as part of this package.
Thank you, and we certainly don't want to see other errors of that nature. That's why we're taking the trouble to double check that there haven't been other trees inadvertently omitted. Right, thank you very much, and thank you for raising that, Councillor. We now move to item number 9, which is the independent review of health and safety at the ports. So if I can have Sarah Johnson-Smith and Alistair Cameron at the table to talk to this. Can I just foreshadow, which I actually did when we had the Maritime Union in front of us, that there is a chair's recommendation at the end, and that is just, I've raised it with Chasms and also in a discussion I've had with the board of the port, but I think it would be worthwhile having an audit of progress on the implementation of these recommendations being made by the organisation that made the recommendations, and that's what recommendation F is about. But I'll move this item. Do I have a seconder for the item? Councillor Kathy Casey and Sarah, I think you're going to lead the discussion on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, councillors. So this report represents, I suppose, the formal conclusion of the process that commenced last year with the independent review of health and safety at the port. So as you're aware, the focus of Chasns, who obviously were engaged to do this work, was to assess and comment on the port's systemic management of its critical risks for health and safety and the health and safety culture at Ports of Auckland. So the final report was released 30th of March and it's appended for your reference to this document. And we did have an opportunity to workshop with the report authors, Roger McRae and Chris Alderson from Chasns, on this to sort of discuss with them directly their findings and the key recommendations. I mean, there are 45 recommendations in this report, so I won't go through them all, but I mean, effectively the headline one is really they did identify that there are systemic problems at the port in relation to those matters, and as such they've made 45 recommendations to address that, which traverse a number of different areas. So in the report itself, the Chasns for each recommendation gave an estimated kind of implementation period and an estimated impact for each recommendation. But they note that that's something that the port needs to evaluate as its own separate exercise. So we're sort of moving to the next steps. Council's focus as shareholder is really about ensuring effective oversight and that we have assurance around the port's implementation of that review, of the review recommendations. So as such, you'll see the recommendations we've got set out in B, C, D and E, and also additionally F. So I won't read through those, but effectively covers an implementation plan, regular reporting on those recommendations, safety case as it relates to straddle automation at Ferguson Wharf, and also reflecting this in the upcoming draft SCI, which is due to us 1st of August. So that's a quick summary of the report. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And just to draw your attention to 2 points in that recommendation that are really important. One, the ports will be coming back here to be held to account, both in July and October at the governing body meetings. And the discussion that we had when we had the authors of the report here, if the straddle automation is going to come into effect within a couple of months, that recommendation from the authors of the report needs to be acted upon urgently, which is to know that there is a safety assurance framework for that project. And I've asked specifically in a letter to the ports that be addressed. So we now open up for any questions. First of all, questions rather than comments. Councillor Pipakoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tēnā koutou. It's really good that we've got to this point of having the report in front of us. Still really concerned about what's happening with the relationship with the union and what appears to be an ongoing, very antagonistic relationship, as if the union is kind of the problem. But I just wondered, in terms of where under B it says we will get asking for a copy of its high-level plan. Why are we focusing on a high-level plan rather than the plan? Like, surely there is just one plan for implementation. And what do you see as the distinction with a high-level plan? And I guess the question, so that's one question, and related to that is, we heard from MUNS that they haven't had any input into that implementation plan. Do we see that as an issue or a gap or anything that we should be requesting that more work is done on that implementation plan that does involve MUNS?
Thanks for your question, Councillor. I think with regards to high-level plan, I suppose it envisaged that we'd be expecting that plan. It may not be completely detailed at this point, but we'd be certain, because there are 45 recommendations, so we may be expecting that some of it is dealt with in a high-level way in terms of some of the stuff that might be more for those outer years, because the Chasns do recognise this as a journey that would be, some things are for implementation they think could be done within the first 6 months, some kind of a year, and then some a bit longer. So I think we use the words high level to reflect that some aspects of it may be more high level because of their nature in those outer years, but certainly in the immediate term, in terms of some of the actions they'll be prioritising straight away, we would expect that to be more detailed. So we weren't envisaging there would be 2 separate plans, but that there would be one plan, but some of it, as I said, may have more detail than some of the other recommendations, just depending on where they're at with that implementation framework.
I think probably we could actually delete the words high level. We just want a copy of their plan for the implementation. So that might make it easier, Sarah. So maybe if I can ask our team to delete that, and we'll just talk about their plan for implementation. That leaves it open.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, and I think that will just mean that there doesn't end up being 2 versions and we're only seeing the sanitised one. There was a second just part of my question in terms of how that implementation plan has been drafted and the input from MUNS.
Look, through the chair, I'd refer directly to a couple of the key findings and recommendations in the report itself. Paragraph 2.0.8 says that POAL executive management needs to address perceived engagement and trust gaps between executive management and the frontline workforce regarding health and safety expectations. From the observations and interviews made by this review, resolving this issue will be a significant challenge for POAL. I think the report quite clearly highlights that there does need to be a lot more engagement between frontline staff and the executive, and at a governance and ownership level, I don't think it's our role to dictate how Ports goes about preparing their plan, but I think the recommendations from the review itself make that reasonably clear that there should be a degree of engagement. I think following the public input today when MUNS was here, I think the Mayor and Deputy Mayor both said that they would contact the Chair of the Board, and maybe that could be pointed out.
Yeah, and I reiterate that our advice, it's a very carefully used word, would be for the board to engage with and cooperate with the union over health and safety, which is within the spirit and the requirement of the review's recommendations. So I don't want to get involved in a to and fro between the union and the board, but I think Bill and I can both make it reasonably clear that the spirit and the requirement of the review is that the union and other workers be involved in this process, because that's essential if we're to achieve the outcomes that we seek. Right. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Shane Henderson.
Thanks, Mayor. And this might be more a question for us, but I'll just put it anyway. Our most direct line of control is through the board appointment process. So is there scope for workers' representation to be directly appointed to the board through us?
As you'll be aware, board appointments thanks for your question, board appointments are made through under delegation from the governing body by the Ports of Auckland appointment panel, on which the Mayor chairs and also Jim sits, and the Ports of Auckland chair. So we utilise our company Kerridge to help support us in that process. So there's nominations for appropriately qualified people can be nominated, but it does go through a process, as does everyone, for candidate search, selection, interview, assessment, etc. So there's not sort of the practice of a direct appointment of third parties, but there are a number of candidates can be considered in the mix, and they go through that process that Kerridge, I suppose, independently verifies, and then on which the Ports appointment panel make the decision. So does that answer your question?
Thank you very much. Councillor John Watson.
Yeah, my question follows on a little bit from Councillor Henderson's. Currently, there are 6 directors on the board, is that correct? Yeah, so does this appointment committee have the ability to add over and above that 6, or is it sort of a kind of replacement basis?
Under the memorandum of understanding, there can be more there can be more directors than that. That would be a discussion we would then have with the board of the chair of the board. I'd just like to make the point, I made it to the union. We did seek, when we made the initial appointments, nominations from both the Maritime Union of New Zealand and the Council of Trade Unions. We received a list of nominations. They did go through the normal process that Sarah talked about, and the result was that we got a person, one of the people that the trade union movement had recommended because of her expertise in health and safety, appointed to the board. So I think that was seen and acknowledged by the union as good faith. But it's not plucking somebody out from outside the process. It's about, if anybody wants to come up with nominations for Kerridge to examine as part of the process to be on that board, we'd welcome that from the unions, we'd welcome it from any councillor or from any other source. But it's important to follow the proper process and how those appointments are made so that due diligence is done and we're sure that we're getting appropriate appointments.
Okay, so thanks. So the follow-up question to that was, I don't know if it appeared in the body of the report as such, but certainly from the reviewers in our workshop, they made the recommendation as a response to a question that, it would be quite appropriate to have an engineer, or a stevedore, even better, considered as part of that process. So what I'm hearing from the mayor, so I just want to check with the officers, is that that there is an avenue there for any interested party to proceed through that process to try and get some such appointment if appropriate. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And last question, Councillor Kathy Casey.
It's not really a question, so I won't try to dress it up. I do have a comment.
So let's move to comments and then we'll legitimise what you're about to do. First comment, Councillor Kathy Casey.
Do the staff need to stay here because it's not? It's not.
If it's not a question, no, that's fine. Thank you very much to Sarah and to Alistair.
How do I start? Something that the union said today, that our job is to ask questions of the port. We've all been in this room with the port, and guess where we got asking questions? Nowhere. I have absolutely no confidence in our current processes of accountability, and I don't actually know how to do this. I was thinking it's fine for Bill and the mayor to ring the board chair, but actually 4 weeks ago, if the mayor hadn't proposed this independent review, it would be business as usual at the ports, which meant that every worker there is at risk because of various dysfunctional relationships and trust issues. Nothing has changed. 4 weeks, that's what they've come back to tell us. Nothing has changed. So for me, it's just not enough. This is just not enough. And I know that you're going to tell me I can't direct the ports to do anything, but actually, we spent money on this independent review. We had the board chair on the day saying that they will fully accept and work with the unions to implement all these recommendations. The union invites them for the first time to a meeting of the workers, and they don't even get the courtesy of a reply from the board chair. I'm sorry, there's something really wrong there. And I'm probably not allowed to say this because it's crossing the boundaries of governance and management. But there is something really wrong there. And I'm not prepared to wait to change one director at a time to fix the problem of health and safety, which is putting our workers at risk at the port. And I don't quite know what to do other than I was thinking about another resolution to say that we expect, as a result of the independent review, that management will work closely with the workforce and the unions to implement all the recommendations. If they haven't got that, and they obviously haven't, they need to see it in writing. So what you said, Mayor, you should put up there in writing, from all of us, unanimously. Because that's what's wrong. It's still business as usual, with no change. Sorry, that was just a rant.
Thank you, and I'll reply to that in a moment. But first of all, Councillor Watson, comment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I certainly have had to change tack a little bit in the comments I plan to say. There's a little bit of a Peter and the Wolf element at work here. At some previous point, you might have thought the presentation today, well, that's a union, let's go and hear the story from the management and the other side. But in between that, we've got a report that tells us what that story is. So we have to take at face value what we're getting told today, because that's what our reviewers have said. They started off by saying in their report that there's clear academic evidence that the safety climate is directly linked to employee perceptions of management's commitment to safety, and that is a good measure because it is a predictor of injuries. Well, that's actually no revelation. That just seems to be fairly much common sense, as is the key influences of the safety climate are the CEO, senior management, and frontline supervisors. The CEO and senior management set the tone and prioritisation of health and safety. So they're telling us what anyone that has any experience in any workforce knows, that that sort of direction and culture comes from the top, and that workers respond on the basis of whether that appears genuine or not, and then everything beneficial flows from that. Certainly in terms of the trust, and we know about that there's this chronic and ongoing lack of trust, which is presented euphemistically as a barrier to implementation. Well, I think we've gone beyond that. Their reviewers have said ultimately the board must take responsibility. They've said that. They mentioned in their verbal feedback to us for the recommendation of a stevedore, or at least an engineer on that board. I mean, we heard today, for goodness sake, they can't even get a person on the Health and Safety Committee. They weren't involved in the draft plan to implement our recommendations. This is after the report. This is after them coming here and getting the supposed grilling from the Auckland councillors. They didn't even attend a stop work meeting after the report. I mean, how bad does it have to get before there's a more meaningful response from us as the councillors? Because we have a responsibility here, and I guess our performance to date hasn't been all that impressive, and I do have a bit of sympathy for the management, because one of the consistent things they actually have said to us is that the consistent undermining of the ports of Auckland by people from within this room, whether it goes to selling off the port or moving the port, has undermined the workforce and the management. That's the one consistent thing they have said. When we have councillors, chairs of committees writing to the government, talking about, asking the government if they want to buy up 50% in the ports of Auckland. So that's had an effect, undoubtedly, on the morale and the overall atmosphere with which these people have to operate. But that can only go so far, and we've well and truly gone beyond that in terms of the lack of meaningful response to this very damning and largely uncontested report. So credit to the Ports of Auckland, when they give their response to the review, their hands are up. Basically, they've given up. They accede to all the criticisms there. But what we have here is a classic situation of all the right words, all the plans, all the recommendations, but with no real apparent change with the personnel that are involved. And that's at the crux of it. Plans, policies, recommendations are only as good as the people who are implementing them, and we have a real issue here. I was appalled the other week at the treatment of a couple of colleagues around here when they asked a simple question. That was 4 weeks ago. I asked the question, has that information been given to those councillors in that interim? Well, there you go. There's your answer. A simple question, and a month on, you're getting the same treatment as the stevedores down on the wharf. So I would say, colleagues, that it's enough time on the mixed messages from Auckland Council. I saw the little encounters after that appalling meeting, and there was the usual round of backslapping and small chit-chat. I don't take that as an effective follow-up to that sort of behaviour. So I'm just wondering what we're going to hear in terms of response on the basis of the presentation from the Maritime Union today, because we do have a rather unfortunate habit of saying one thing and then doing another. We had an example of that recently where, in response to the CCO review, the $800,000 CCO review, where it made comments about Panuku's need to balance commercial and private interest, commercial and public interest, I should say. We had an item that came up, which was then led off by none less than the chair of the CCO committee, undermining that public interest, or at least negating it. So as much as we're told that, you know, a word will be told to passed on to the board chair, or I don't think that's really sufficient. Councillor Casey called for a resolution. I think after our presentation today, that's the least we can expect. And I don't really want to wait to July for the next update as a consequence of what we heard today. So as much as we all know how we're constrained with the legislation, I think we've been remiss in our response to date, and that follows on from as recently as a month ago, where we sat here and allowed a couple of councillors to be treated in a very offhand manner, and still no response. So I don't know about you, but as far as I'm concerned, I want something a little bit more dramatic, a little bit more meaningful, because we've been told today that nothing has changed in terms of the personnel.
Okay, I want to take a call now, which still reserves my right of reply at the end, because I disagree fundamentally with a couple of things that have been said. The first thing, nothing has changed. That's not true. The situation around health and safety has changed fundamentally at the ports. Otherwise, why did we set up the review? Why did we have the public recommendations? Why did we have in front of us a series of recommendations that say, and will prove that these are not words, but these are recommendations, 45 of them set out, detailed, that they have to respond to every one of those and say, we have progressed these recommendations. That's what's changed. Mixed messages from council? Not at all. This council right now has done more than the preceding 3 or 4 councillors before it, in terms of making it absolutely clear that we will not tolerate fatalities and a culture of health and safety at the ports that was appalling. I don't know how directly I have to say that. I've said it publicly. I went down and spoke to the board last Monday, and I laid it out to them again. I said, have a look for yourselves at the report by Maritime New Zealand into Leslie Gelberger. Have a look at the report from WorkSafe on Laboom Dyer, and tell me how you managed to allow that to happen when you had rules that weren't monitored and weren't enforced. There were no mixed messages. I was as clear as it is possible to be clear, and I've said that in this chamber, and I've said it to their faces directly. So what we have are 45 clear recommendations. We have 2 report back sessions to this body where we will be asking the hard questions about what they've done and how far they've moved and what they still have to do. On top of that, we have an expert body that made those recommendations that will be reporting back to us publicly about how far they've gone in implementing them. We have on the Health and Safety Committee a person that was recommended by the Council of Trade Unions and endorsed today by the Maritime Union of New Zealand and by the Council of Trade Unions that will ensure those things are happening. So I simply don't accept that we are sending mixed messages or that nothing has changed fundamentally. There are still changes to be made, including on the makeup of that port. Jim and I are working on that right now to make sure that we are confident that 3 new directors appointed to that board will make a difference and will have a change of attitude. So I just want to put those things clearly on the table. I can't think of what more we could have done as a council to get the result that we want on this. So I'm sorry if I sound passionate about it. I've invested hours and hours and hours of time in getting the result that we all want, which is a safe port. And I won't rest until I'm assured, absolutely assured, that we have achieved that. And I'm speaking for the Chief Executive as well on that. So the next comment comes from Councillor Shane Henderson, please.
Thanks, Mayor. That will be hard to follow. Look, I want to acknowledge the families affected by health and safety in this. I think we should always be doing that. And today, the family of Amo Kalati, who spoke publicly this morning for the first time, and it must have been the hardest thing for that family to do in the whole world to go through. You know, putting a face to that pain should, from our perspective today, be a reminder of the importance of what we're discussing today. Regarding board appointments, Councillor Watson and I are in a bit of a tag team today on this. You know, I think that if the workers are willing, we should be looking at workers' representation on the board. I think that's a good suggestion. There is a recommendation in the independent report to work closer together, and we've heard today that that hasn't happened as yet. So we need to use the levers that we have to act when we can. The health and safety situation has changed and it has improved. I want to acknowledge the points made by the Mayor here. I think you're exactly right in that. And furthermore, I'd say that we should be thanking the Mayor for the hard work on this and for leading this publicly and in his office late at night, working on this kind of stuff. But where there is still a sticking point is that the public don't just want things to change and to make things safer. They also want accountability, and I think that's fair enough. We need to remember the beautiful Māori concepts of rebalancing, of the maintenance of balance and harmony in a situation, in a community, and that wrongs are put right. That's what people expect, that's what the workers expect, that's what Aucklanders expect, and that's what we should be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and finally Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just quickly want to acknowledge, first of all, the workers and their whānau who have been telling us this in the public, the issues at the port for a very long time. And I also want to acknowledge Councillor Kathy Casey, who even, I think the first time I ever saw Kathy speak was on this issue many years ago when I was a local board member, and she has been saying this over and over and over, and people have dismissed Kathy many times and said, don't worry, there's no issue. You know, the treatment of Kathy sometimes over the last many years on this issue has not been okay at all. And I think that, you know, she deserves some of the credit for finally pushing these issues out into the open, and acknowledge the Mayor and the mayoral office for doing what we keep getting told that we couldn't do, is have a review of this nature and have priorities of this nature, as we keep getting told it's none of our business. Literally, as Councillor Watson said a few weeks ago, being told pretty simple questions were none of our business. Well, it is our business. The port's 100% owned by the council and the people of Auckland, and workers have had to die and be injured for this to be taken seriously, which I think is a worst case scenario. Some of the issues, and I won't go into them, but the figures, the trip alarms, the things that have happened, which are systemic, they're not accidental, they're not user error. A safe workplace, you know, all workplaces have accidents, but a workplace should be safe enough that user error or accidents do not kill people or injure people. There are ways, there are systems in place, and it's clear from the words on the report and the presentations we've had that there are serious issues that are now being rectified, but actually need our continued focus in that area. And I think, you know, there are other issues, relationships that need to be addressed. Some of the questions I asked were around, you know, whether the board and the management felt they were separated enough to be holding the management to account. And I want to see more clear, what's the word? I want to see that happening more, or proof that that's happening, that the board feel they're able to keep the management to account. The fact that the automation has no safety plan after all these years of planning, the fact that the health and safety doesn't sit in a higher tier of reporting on such a potentially dangerous workplace are concerns that I hope are getting rectified. But yeah, I guess for me, this is a sad but positive move forward. But I just want to put it back out there to the workers and their families who've been telling us these things for a very long time, and now it's in black and white. The proof is there. But also, thank you again, Mayor, and those who've worked on this, and Kathy Casey for saying these things for a decade or so.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I've just, and I'll accept it from the Chair, an amendment, it's not an amendment, sorry, it'll be accepted as a recommendation by the Chair, which reads, expect the board and management of the Ports of Auckland will engage closely with the workforce and the union representatives to fully implement the health and safety recommendations of the independent review. That's courtesy of Councillor Kathy Casey. I'm very happy with that, happy to, I think that picks up some of the points that have been made around the table as well. Councillor Tracy Mulholland.
Thank you, Worship. This is actually the first time I've ever spoken on this matter. I have listened to a lot of the information. I would like to thank the staff for the report and the work that is done in the background, and also thank the earlier presenters and Russell and Craig. One thing, Your Worship, was I was somewhat surprised to hear the feedback from that presentation that some of the aspects of relationship building that we were promised haven't taken place. So I'll be very brief and just say I'll tutuku and support your words, Your Worship, and we do need to do better. So I do support the actions of actually building better relationships and having a much better health and safety record. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor. And Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor. The port's been through some difficult times, and there's no question about that. And the loss of life is absolutely tragedy, and all of our hearts go out to the families and surround that. It is not acceptable. It's how we go about changing that mentality, how we go about changing that thought and actions by the management and the board is it's a critical part. And that's about our relationship with the management and with the board in particular. And we've got to get that into a lot better place. And if you can want to call it chummery or whatever, it's not. It's about actually building trust and acceptance between the board and us. And that's been lacking. And I think part of the CCO review's work is to absolutely build that trust up. It's been mentioned in the, by Roger McLean and Chas's report, and it's certainly mentioned by the CC review recommendations. And that's critical. Overall criticism and negativity won't work here. We have to build a level of trust and understanding across the board. And it's a two-way street. Thank you, Tracy. So, Mr. Mayor, I support the recommendation. Kathy, thank you for your extra bit on there. I think that's well focused. Having been an employer and still are one, how well you get on with your staff is critical. And that's about them trusting you and you trusting them. And we've got to do that. So thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. And Councillor Fessor-Collins.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't planning on speaking to this item today, but I'm grateful that people have. Look, I thought I'd go and stand behind the three amigos who took their petition to have Gibson, demanding that Mr. Gibson resign. I just stood behind them and made sure that they knew where the port was, so that they knew where they were going that morning. When I used to lecture in education, we always used to talk about the need for the relationship and for that relationship to have trust. The research tells us that teachers are able to move a student's achievement rate by 30% if they have a good relationship with them. So a student who's sitting on around 40% could go right up to 60, 70 even, with a good teacher-student relationship. The same relationship can have a detrimental effect on the student by 30%. So you could have a student sitting on 60% who'd go right down to 30% because of that teacher-student relationship. It's all built on trust. We've heard that this afternoon. I didn't see any trust in our relationship when their board came here and we had their chair here. And I'm not going to say things that were said in that confidential workshop meeting, but I struggled to see how there was trust. And the people, if you watched Kalati's family who were on breakfast this morning, you would feel that one of the basic elements of what they were saying was there's been extremely little trust. That family's in South Auckland. It's one of our families. And we can sit here all day and talk about, oh, we've got to get the governance structure right. But the reality is it's our workers. And this report tells us that there's a different culture between the night staff as there is with the day staff. And when are our people there? They're in the night staff. That's when our people are there. This family waited 3 hours in the freezing cold while their loved one was tried to get rescued off a ship. He was already gone. And we've got to understand that really clearly. He's one of our boys. This is one of our dads. He's young. This is the aspiration that we talk about in South Auckland all the time. And so whilst we're trying to establish trust at this end, the reality for people like Councillor Filipaina and myself is we've got to face these families and prove to them that this is going to happen. I don't have the same level of confidence in building the trust relationship given what I saw in that workshop just a few weeks ago. And I'm really disappointed. Look, Mayor, I'm glad you're as passionate as you are, and I'm glad this report was produced and you led that work. So well done to you, but by golly, this is a struggle for me. Because this is about how we build trust amongst those who are working. We've heard from the unions. Yeah, we might do a little bit more. I like what Dr. Casey has put up there with G, but I'm still not sure as to how we're going to see the workers and the unions and the management working closer together. But yeah, we're going to get some reporting on it. But I think it's time we really demand it. Given the temperament of your speech, Mr. Mayor, it's that level of demand that I think the people of Auckland are after. So I commend you for that passion that you've shared this afternoon or this morning, because that's what I think our families, in particular the families in South Auckland, are after, because they're the ones that are employed there. So I hope that we all take that same level of passion and commitment into an ongoing building some kind of relationship that's going to work, because what I have seen to date has not convinced me at all that they're about being in this relationship. And I think we're trying our best to warm them up, but I'm not convinced that they are. And so my disappointment is that I still think we're dragging people into this relationship. And if there's going to be trust, I'd like to see a whole lot more from the Ports of Auckland. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and concur with those comments. Sorry, we have another call now. Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wasn't planning on speaking on this either, because I think the point has been clearly made that the relationship is not good between us and the Ports of Auckland CEO and the board. We've raised about the families, that they are our own, and I just I don't listen to the ones that keep calling for people's resignations. People are calling for my resignation on the Onehunga Facebook page that I'll be gone by lunchtime. So I don't want to be like them, but I agree in this instance about calling for resignations in regards to the Ports of Auckland. I think of things in terms of my own family. If my family was going to go work at the port, where would I sit? And I wouldn't want them to go work at the port. I went bananas because my family were affected by the Eastern Busway changes, and it's just too dangerous for people to drive there. So I feel the same thing with Ports of Auckland. And this report backs that up, like 45 recommendations. It is a dangerous place to work. Why would we want our families to go and work at the ports? So, I look at the comments, like the only reason those voices came through in that report was because they were anonymous. So what kind of workplace culture is going on there? And, I love the diversity inclusion policy that says they support their people, their employees bringing their whole selves to work. But clearly that is not the case, because these people had to go anonymous in order to get their concerns and their experiences heard. So I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt and help them out, ask them questions about, are you being a successful business? Because that is really the only remit that we've got as shareholders. And even they acknowledge that they're not running a successful business. So they say that and we go, yep, it's so bad, so bad. So, it is on us now. And I do acknowledge everything that you and Jim have done to get them to this stage, to getting new board members appointed. But yeah, it's not enough. So I agree with what everybody is saying around here. We need to do more. And we need to do what we can to change that board by sacking them now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In reply, I understand and share the emotions that surround this. 3 people are dead. They were, we can say about the first 2, the third is still under inquiry. We should remember that. That's Amo Kalafi. There will be a WorkSafe report in due course. I'm not going to preempt that. I can't, and it would be wrong to even speculate on it. But 3 people are dead. For 2 of them, there were systemic problems that led to their deaths. I knew that. I knew there was a serious problem on the wharf with a poor culture of health and safety without even having to set up a review. I asked you to vote for the setting up of the review because I wanted to move beyond the emotion of the anger at the loss of these lives to a constructive way in which we could prevent that happening again. And that was the value of the review, not to tell us what we already knew, that there was something fundamentally wrong at ports on health and safety, but to give us a blueprint to enable us to address those problems and to resolve them. We can't do anything about the lives that have been lost, but we do have an obligation to act to prevent other lives being needlessly lost. And that's what this review and its recommendations enable us to do. Not one of us around here, despite how passionately we all speak about it, are experts on health and safety. So we pulled in experts on health and safety to say what is wrong and how do we fix it. And we have that. The next step now is to ensure that those recommendations are not given lip service to, but are fully implemented. And the recommendations in the report before us today should give us comfort that that will happen. I don't know what else we can do beyond that than the belt and braces approach that we have now or will be adopting shortly to make sure that we get the outcome that we need on the wharf. So I endorse that. I endorse Councillor Casey's recommendation. That is our expectation. I said that to Munns this morning. Our expectation is that the recommendations, the detail and the spirit of them be implemented, and that means the involvement of the union in that. These are the people that are at the workface, and they need to be involved. There's some wisdom there, there's some experience there, and whatever differences might exist between management and union, that should not translate into not cooperating fully to stop the unnecessary loss of any further life or any further serious injury on the waterfront. And that's what our expectation is, and that expectation will be conveyed very clearly to the Ports Board. I think I'll leave it at that. I think we've got a very good basis for carrying this further, and I am expecting to see other changes. We're talking about health and safety at the moment, but there are a series of other shortcomings in terms of the performance of the ports that I also addressed with the board earlier this week. On every indicator, they are not doing as well. They are not doing. They are not competing effectively with other ports. And we are the shareholder, and we are acting on behalf of our ratepayers. We've made an investment in this port, and we want it to work well, not by simply slamming it at a distance, but by ensuring that the changes are made to ensure that it will work well and the changes that we can control are changes in the appointment of the board, who then have the responsibility for the employment of the chief executive. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I declare that carried and carried unanimously. Right. We now come to item 10 on the agenda, which is the amendments to the alcohol control bylaw. So if I can ask Paul and Elizabeth to come to the table. I'm going to ask Josephine Bartley, Councillor Josephine Bartley, to move this. Do we have a seconder for the recommendations? Councillor Casey. So it's been moved and seconded. And Councillor Bartley, I'd like you to introduce it, and then we'll call on officers if they wish to add anything to your introduction to do so. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this item is about amending the alcohol control bylaw. We had a panel set up to go through the hearing and hear from the submitters. The panel was myself, Councillor Kathy Casey, IMSB member Glenn Wilcox, and I acknowledge them for their time and efforts and reading all the documentation to be able to come to their deliberation. I also acknowledge Monique Lowry from Auckland Unlimited and Acting Senior Sergeant Rachel Cameron from the Alcohol Harm Prevention Unit, who was also part of the hearings with us. You'll see our recommendations there, and thank you so much to Paul and Elizabeth for their work in putting together this bylaw, the bylaw recommendations, but also the bylaw amendment. It was 1,500 pages of submissions, 883 people submitted, no, 3,000 pages of submissions. So they did an incredible amount of work. You'll see our recommendations there are to adopt the proposed amended bylaw in attachment C of your report, to apply the proposed Waiora Western Springs Stadium ban area to any major event held at Western Springs outer fields, as well as the main fields, to extend it to the Auckland Zoo car park because we were thinking about displacement, to extend it from Mount Smart to also the Te Papapa train station, because that train station is actually in use. So we wanted to cover that area, and fan trails. So those are the main points. So this is all about, when I was on the local board, staff would come to us every time there was a major event and ask for a liquor ban. And then our local board was like, why don't you just have a blanket one over all major events at that venue? And that is what has come to fruition now. So it's blanket temporary bans over 4 major venues, over major events at those venues. Have I left anything out, Councillor Casey?
Thank you very much, Councillor Bartley, for that introduction. Paul or Elizabeth, is there anything that you'd like to add to that? Just to make it clear, I'm sure everybody around this table understands, but not necessarily everybody that might be following it online. This is not banning the sale of alcohol within the venue by proper licensed authorities. It's about the areas surrounding the venues and the preloading or post-loading that might occur in those areas that create threats. Post-loading, I think that's I probably invented that, Councillor, but if you pre and post, that kind of, I think it works.
Yeah, so to
Paul
put
and Elizabeth, you're fine with that?
So just to put it in plain English, it's about preventing people from bringing their own alcohol to those events.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the disorder that follows that outside. As we've seen actually in earlier occasions, I think Paul raised it with me earlier at Christmas in the Park. In the early years of that, I think I'm correct if that's the event where alcohol was being brought in and it did cause huge problems in what was otherwise a pretty happy family environment. So I think the understanding of the input of the motivations behind these recommendations are pretty clear. So I'll open it up now for questions from councillors. And the first question is in the name of Councillor Desley Simpson.
Thanks, Your Worship, and thanks for putting the sort of practical oversight on it, and to you, Councillor, as well. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions just to help the people, the public, understand this better. So my first question is, so that means that you can still have events at the Domain, like Urban Polo and Christmas in the park, that have alcohol there in that event. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So alcohol can still be sold or provided in the licensed areas at the event, and events like Urban Polo have a license, so they can still have their events.
Thank you.
And Christmas in the Park, the VIP area will still have alcohol, although that was a concern for us because it's actually quite hypocritical to say no alcohol, but if you're high up enough to be invited to the VIP tent, you can still get pissed at that event. So unfortunately, there's nothing that we can do about that, but that was a concern that we noted.
Yeah. Oh, well, can I ask the next question? I wouldn't put it quite like that, but anyway. My next question is, look, at the Domain, quite often people have their wedding photos there, and they might have a bottle of whatever and get a photo taken with a bottle of, I'll call it champagne, whatever it is. Is that still allowed? Are you saying that you can have alcohol at the Domain for things like that? Is it you're not banning alcohol from any part in the Domain? Is that? Could you please clarify?
Yes, so weddings wouldn't meet the threshold for a major event, so alcohol would still be able to be consumed in that event.
So you can still go there for a picnic and have a glass of wine?
Yes, that's correct.
Fabulous, thank you.
Yes, you can still do that, but the reality we know and we have experienced is that alcohol harm does occur because people, don't just have the glass of wine at those particular areas. They come in there with their boxes of Cody's, they get wasted, and there's brawls, there's fights. And I'm sorry, that's the perspective I bring because that's what I've seen. And that's what the rest of our panel agreed with. So it was about protecting our communities, which is why we recommend these recommendations here. But yes, you can still have that behaviour. Love it if that happened, but that doesn't just happen.
So I think what we've got is that we've got large numbers of people at big events. Drinking by bringing your own alcohol into the venue creates a real problem. If there's somebody there picnicking on a Sunday afternoon with a glass of wine, or they're celebrating a wedding with a glass of champagne, we tend not to have those problems. So it's about the numbers of people and related to the events. Councillor Richard Hills.
I don't think I had a question. Maybe I was flailing around or something.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Cooper, however, is not flailing, but wanting to ask a question.
It was just a comment in terms of our compliance and monitoring. Is that
I'll move to, if that's, there's no other questions, so we'll move to any comments.
Yeah, I guess the thing is,
Councillor
this is about the way we approach monitoring and compliance, is that we use a graduated approach. So Councillor Simpson's having a bottle of Moet or Mum in the Domain with her family, a little picnic. We're not going to go racing out there, or even if it was someone from anywhere. But if somebody is brawling in the car park, drinking and causing harm, whoever in a flash. So it's about harm. So if there's no harm, we don't do anything about it. But if there's harm, of course we do. So I think it's about applying a sensible lens to these occurrences.
Thank you, and that's a very good summary. So I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. I declare that. We come now to the last item, substantive item on the agenda, which is about the endorsement of the Mayor and Deputy Mayor as sponsors of the Auckland Light Rail project. Just before we move that, sorry, I'm going to move it because I've got a chair's... I'm sorry, Councillor Collins, because there is a further recommendation B, which is on the screen in front of you. You'll recall that when the Minister of Transport came to speak to us, he suggested that there would be a local board representative on the establishment unit itself, but he also suggested that perhaps we could put a councillor on the board, and I rang to confirm that and had a discussion with him this morning to confirm it, and yes, there is a place for a councillor on it. So I'm recommending that we endorse the chair of the relevant committee, the planning committee, as a member of the establishment unit board of the light rail project. Also bringing to, sorry, I'm losing that. We also have council officers on the establishment unit, yourself, Jim, and I think Megan, Shane on, is just the two of you? Yeah, okay, so I'll add that in, and if, so I'll move and Councillor Collins will second, and we'll now have questions, beginning with Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Your Worship. In querying B, I have a question that's actually legitimate. You might think I'm being frivolous, but I've been around the planning of transport issues and watching it closely, you know, a lot of my life. And as Megan will know, as a legacy Auckland City officer, how important it was in the planning of Britomart and other subsequent decisions that were taken in and around public transport. We actually used, in terms of our reference group, the National Council of Women, because men and women, I have discovered, look at public transport quite differently, you know, and especially along those routes of key arterials. So with no disrespect at all to the Chair of Planning, we've got, and I don't underestimate the power of one Megan Tyler, she's saved a tree today for me, but in terms of elected members, we have traditionally seen it completely male dominated. And I don't in any way disregard the great intelligence that Councillor Darby has, but I would like to see someone like Angela or someone like, you know, I'd like, no, this is not self-promotion, I don't want to do it, but I would be bitterly disappointed. We have fought for light rail for a very, very long time. It's been on the table, off the table, on the table. If this is to get traction, we need to give it every consideration and a strong wind behind it, blowing it along. So I'm uncomfortable with your proposal here, Your Worship. I think that there should be an elected member who will represent the women of Auckland, and I would like you to give consideration to that.
Thank you. Councillor Daniel Newman.
Megan, in the report set out under paragraph 17, it deals with the challenging issue of the financial implications to date. It states that 1.8 billion allocated for, quote, seed funding from city centre to Māngere and Northwest Rapid Transit. The final costs and funding implications for city centre to Māngere will be known once Cabinet has made decisions on the mode, route and the delivery entity. I accept that what we're being asked to do here is to endorse a sponsorship relationship, but I also sense the Trojan horse rumbling very slowly, and it worries me because I haven't yet seen any clarity around the concept that this is the government's aspiration, the government's project, and the government pays. It sort of feels to me like we're kind of being we're almost dancing into a relationship which is going to also involve the allocation of a lot of cost. So what comments, if any, do you have at this time to give me comfort that the costs will actually go to the Crown and not be split?
Through the chair, let me start by saying I'm sure I won't be able to give you the reassurance that you're looking for. All I can say that, well, not completely, all I can say is if I reflect on the Minister's media release, you know, the decisions are being made by Cabinet. It is clearly a government project and they have taken responsibility for that at that level. And certainly previous conversations in the previous term of government was that this was to be paid for by government. I understand and hear your concerns. There's nothing more I can say about that, but clearly the matter of funding will continue to be discussed through both this process and any decision that's ultimately made, and therefore how it gets delivered. So I can't provide you reassurance that there will be no conversation with you as a council at any point in time about funding, but it is clear that this is a government proposal. The Minister has said Cabinet will make the decision. That's where it sits at this stage.
So any operating cost in relation to the Establishment Unit Board and the work associated with it, the consultancy around this will all ultimately be borne by government, and if there's any cost incurred by council, we'll be reimbursed for that.
Yes, so that's absolutely right. So we are able to be reimbursed for the time that the staff put into this proposal, so it enables backfilling or whatever that might need to happen. That's absolutely right. You talked about operational cost and in terms of this process, but also clearly when this is up and running, presumably, again, the operator will be Auckland Transport. So clearly there must be some operational costs associated. But again, there's no more information or detail around that. That is all part of the conversation that needs to happen.
I think that's a good question, Councillor, and you've heard me speak on it a number of times. There has been no public suggestion made to me, or private suggestion, I should add, that we will be paying for this. I thought quite cleverly we loaded the cost of that at the time of the last Auckland Transport Alignment project on the government and didn't accept that this was something that council could meet. Like Megan, I can't give the assurance, but what I can say is our involvement at both the establishment unit level and at the sponsorship level, I would expect your representatives were to push back against the contribution by Auckland on this. The contribution we made, the 50% contribution to CRL, was extraordinary. That probably also should have been a central government cost. And we're not wanting and not able to see that replicated for light rail. We simply don't have the money, which is always a good defence.
Are you anticipating a proposition? Are you anticipating we'll have to push back?
I'm hoping no, but always get your defence in before you have the attack. And I've made it clear to the Minister that we certainly don't have the ability and don't believe that we have the obligation to fund this, because it is the equivalent of a state highway, if you like. And I don't think there'd be any disagreement around the table on the point that you and I are both making on that. The OPEX of running it in the end, that's a different matter, and we'll have to address that at the time, as I'm sure you're aware. Councillor John Watson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not quite sure what you're going to do with Councillor Fletcher's question, but I do notice in the agenda where the Minister of Transport has identified the importance of inclusive governance structure, and I'd imagine that would go to the principle of diversity too. But notwithstanding what Councillor Fletcher said in terms of herself, I do note that there is only one person here in this assembled group who has direct experience with a project of this magnitude, and I think of the Britomart project, which was an incredibly challenging one, and which is a pivotal role in our region's network now, and that was Councillor Fletcher herself, who navigated a very difficult path there. So I'm just thinking in terms of that inclusiveness and diversity and background in the early 2000s of actually delivering for the region this remarkable project that now serves us all so well. If Councillor Fletcher herself might reflect on that, because certainly in terms of experience and track record on the ground as a former Mayor of Auckland, I don't think there's too many better, but I'll wait to hear what you say about that at some point.
Thank you. Well, maybe I can respond to that now. You'll note that the nominations are not of individuals, they're of positions. So it says the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor. It doesn't say Phil Goff and Bill Cashmore. And as Chair of the Planning Committee, it doesn't say Chris Darby. and that's, I think, and I put the recommendation forward after discussion with the Minister, it's the position that is being held that needs to be represented on it rather than the personality. So if you have a different mayor and deputy mayor and chair of the planning committee for the next term, they may all be women. I don't know. That's not yet decided. I'm not sure how I quite respond to that, councillors. But then it's the position that we're putting up, not the individual. I'd probably also say that for councillors, and we've got at least we've got 5 councillors around here who will be affected by the light rail proposal, affecting the Manukau ward, the Onehunga Mangakiakia, the Mangakiakia Tamaki ward, and the Albert Eden ward, and Waitemata, actually. Sorry, yes, Councillor Coombe. There may be some advantages for the councillors in each of those areas to have the independence of not being part of the establishment unit where they're subject to confidentiality and would have some difficulty commenting on those matters. So that may be also a factor, but the critical factor, Councillor Watson, is that it's the position that's being put up, not the individual. We've got no further questions. Are there any comments? Councillor Filipaina, I don't know whether that was a late question or an early comment.
Not early comment.
Early comment?
But if there's questions before the comment...
Oh, okay, it's a question then.
Thinking of... No, it's a comment. But I don't know if there's any questions.
No, sorry.
Before I do the comment.
No, we've run out of questions, so it's now for comment, and I've recognised you first.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, just in regards to what you just said around having the ability to still be part of the process and not around the confidentiality with this particular group is the reason why I was going to say I don't want to be part of it. And the reason I didn't want to be part of it, even though I ended up chairing the Transport Committee in 2004, and we ended up doing the railway spur from Manukau through to the main North Island trunk line. And that was established in 2009. The reason I don't want to be part of it is exactly what you're saying. I've spoken to the Minister in regards to the input with this particular project. The local board, as you are aware, Your Worship, the local boards will end up having the ability to put somebody onto this. So I'm going to leave that to Māngere o Tahuhu local board. So, look, I endorse A. Chair, just in regards to the comments made by Councillor Fletcher and also Councillor Watson and your reply, just to confirm that what you're indicating in B is that the person who is currently the chair will be Councillor Darby, and depending on the next election in October of 2022, is whoever that person is of the planning committee would be automatically onto this establishment group. So if that is the case, again, it'll be interesting to see what comments come through from there. I am glad that Councillor Darby's name wasn't there, because I would not have supported that. But it is the position. Thank you.
Thank you, that's quite correct. So if the chair of the planning committee or the mayor or the deputy mayor was to change next month for whatever reason, I don't like that response from the deputy mayor. He's trying to opt out early. Then it's the position, not the individual. You're absolutely right. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you. I do support Councillor Fletcher's view. I mean, even just then, I'd put my name down to speak. It was already down there. I think you get to a certain age as a woman and you become invisible. And I think what we excuse me. So I think that the issue here is that if we look at even our chairs group, is predominantly men. We have our mayor and deputy mayor, and all due respect, because you both work exceptionally hard and have got some great results for our city. But if you look at it, you know, so it's going to be by default a male-dominated representation. Even with Auckland Transport, they sit here in front of us, it's pretty much all guys. There is an element, something good about having a mixed group of people on a board. You know, we've got evidence that shows that, but over and over again, it's the blokes. You know, and so we need to be looking at that a lot more closely. So there's that. The other thing about this is that I just have to register my huge disappointment. You know, that this is Mangere, City Centre to Mangere. This is just a repeat of what we had 3 years ago. We've been through all this before with a different minister. So here we go again, wasting more time. We wasted 3 years where we had a busway for the Northwest. It was going to be 100% paid for by the government. It was right, we had busway. Then we were going to have light rail, 100% paid for by the government. Now we're back to some busway improvements, which is, again, we have to find money for. You know, we've got a huge growth right across our region. But again, the Northwest gets left out. And there's people out there just cannot, our community cannot understand it. I'm reading all of our submissions here, you know, it's, and it just, over and over again, people say, we're being left behind again, we've been left behind again. And so here we'll have another, goodness knows how long this will be. And good, I think we need to do it. It needs to be done, absolutely. But we always do it at the expense of another part of our city. And I just think that's a tragedy because we have much fewer employment opportunities out there as well. So for me, yes, it's going to get on. The minister's even told us, I can't even give you a timeline for light rail in the Northwest. That's what he said. I can't even give you a date. So all good this if it goes ahead, but it just seems to me a repeat of what's already been done before. Another 3 years will be wasted and people are waiting. It's disappointing. But I would happily propose, Councillor Fletcher, if you were to go on that in that place. But I get you don't want to.
I decline because I don't enjoy the confidence the mayor has.
So I hope that whoever goes on from the local board is a woman. There's some very capable women in the local boards in these local board areas. I hope that there is somebody, because we just need a different view. I've just done a speech at Anzac Day about women in service and an important part that women played in a national and in a global sense. When times were tough, women stepped up. But what happens is as soon as it's not considered tough anymore, we go to the back again. So I hope that this works, but I honestly haven't got a lot of faith because we've already wasted, it's actually 4 years now. But I hope we can get some better transport outcomes for all, but it doesn't seem that what we were promised nearly 4 years ago is any closer. Thank you. Notwithstanding the efforts of the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor to move things forward.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor. Staying with the West, Councillor Shane Henderson.
Kia ora, thanks Mayor. Yeah, look, I just wanted to briefly speak in support of this. I think that the government is starting to make strides in this, and I think the establishment unit is a fantastic idea, and I think we should get fully behind it. What I would urge is that that establishment unit is tasked not just with City Centre to Mangere, but with creating precedent and relationships and tools that can be used across the city, and not just the Northwest either. Because we've got huge challenges coming up, and Councillor Cooper has said this very well. We've made promises to people in the Northwest. We're packing people in there, and we should, because we have a housing crisis. But at the very time we are increasing housing in the Northwest, we're not doing what we need to do in terms of transport. We're looking at facilities, and I understand that's a huge debate to come. and people are concerned. They want the public services that the rest of the city have. So I think this unit should be tasked with not just city centre Te Mangere, but creating things that can be replicated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Daniel Newman.
This is very interesting. I think that, as I said it to Michael Wood in the discussion, I have confidence in Michael Wood. He's becoming something of a Mr. Fix-It within...
the Bill Birch of the Labour Party.
Thank you for the interjection.
I'm not sure whether he'll take that as a compliment, Councillor.
I have the call. I think he has a very big job to clean up a very, very big mess. And that's what this project is. I'm not overly excited, Councillor Henderson, I'm sorry, I'm not overly excited. I would almost describe it as like a surgical team that's being gathered together for consultations as to how to provide treatment to a very distressed situation. It's a situation that requires a lot of triaging, and the report identifies in a very diplomatic way some fundamental issues. Number one, well, the business case hasn't been settled, hasn't been signed off by the Cabinet. There are reasons for that. We saw in the previous term of central government, there were issues with parties to the government. There were issues in respect to competing propositions. It was never landed. What we have seen is that there has been for generations a concept of light rail from the city centre to Mount Roskill. This is going beyond that. It's not funded. We don't even know what the costs would be to be funded, and I'm very suspicious about where the costs would ultimately fall. I think Councillor Cooper is absolutely right. And when you go out to West Auckland and you see the car park that is the North Western Motorway, it is a debacle. And I thought that there was going to be a solution for the Northwest 4 or 5 years ago. It was announced, and it just hasn't emerged. What is emerging is that the debacle is getting worse. But we're going to have a conversation where the people, in this case, the men of the establishment unit are going to get together and they're going to triage the concept for a discussion so as to take something back to Cabinet at some point, for a decision to be made at some point, which will be funded at some point by somebody, probably, I suspect, a combination of them and us, and I'm bloody worried about that. So, Your Worship, I want to acknowledge you for the work that I have no doubt will be consuming more of your life, because that's what I feel that this particular project is about. It is all inclusive, all encompassing, and it will literally continue to drain people. But I hope that we can get some clarity around this soon, because I think this is a very significant potential financial liability, Councillor Simpson, that is going to be well beyond the scope of this council's balance sheet. And I'm not sure what the opportunity cost will be, but I'm sure that the opportunity cost will be paid for significantly by those poor people in West Auckland and the Northwest who don't have a solution in place. So, Chair, Your Worship, it's a recommendation, but I do hope that we push back urgently around the allocation of costs, because we shouldn't be paying for this.
Thank you. I've got that message loud and clear. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. B. I think from memory, Mr. Birch is one of the key architects of the Think Big projects, wasn't he? So I'm not quite sure that Minister Wood would want to be associated with some similar type of infrastructure. But anyway, thank you for your explanation, Mr. Mayor, in terms of the appointments following positions rather than personalities. However, and that's a perfectly valid response, but I think Councillor Cooper and Councillor Filipaina also have raised some valid points that don't really get addressed through that approach, not least of which is a genuine lack of diversity, because as we found out this morning, individuals are very important. It's not just positions, it's the character of those individuals. And I don't want to labour the point, but we really think we're missing a little bit of a beat here in terms of the expertise and experience that exists within this body in terms of Councillor Fletcher and Britomart, which if you read through any history of those times was really quite an achievement to deliver that project. And pre-Super City Auckland, and admittedly ARC Chair Phil Warren was an important player in that too. So I think, with COVID, we did talk a lot about flexibility and, changing and being, a little bit more adaptive. And doesn't seem to be particularly prevalent in this recommendation here. I think it's important in these sort of positions that we do, get as good an appointment as we can. I mean, we had an instance with the ports where, to me it seems incredible that we don't have an actual worker or workers representative on a board. That seems to me to be quite startling. I think of boards of every secondary school in New Zealand has a teacher, has a worker on it. In fact, they have a student on it too, so they have two. So I think some of our appointments are really out of step with the 2020s, really, and this, without offering casting any aspersions on the individuals here. I think we've missed that opportunity here. As much as it could change last term, there's going to be a very important introductory period coming up. Where a lot of things are going to be put in place, which then follow as a consequence of that. A little bit like the implementation plan for safety on the ports. That's been done. Well, a certain amount of the work will be done here, and I guess it's called the members of the establishment. We've tended to really reflect that word in its fullest meaning. We don't really have some of the diversity, and in Councillor Fletcher's instance, the expertise that is available. But I take your point, Mr. Mayor. But I think it's a lost opportunity to perhaps show a little bit of flexibility that might address some of the issues that other councillors have raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last speaker is Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. When you go back to Albert Street today, councillors, I want you to just pause on the steps of Aotea Square and have a look at the Toby Twist's bronze sculpture that Mike Lee and I'd lost the mayoralty at that point because it was all about Chrissy's little train set, and talkback radio worked against me, and I was trying to envisage for Aucklanders without the practical props of showing how a competitive international city might truly work. Anyway, lost the mayoralty, that was fine. And I might add that John Banks had the graciousness to come here later and apologise profusely to me and say you were absolutely right on everything. And that was very kind of him to do that. But back in 2002, Mike Lee and I decided that we needed a reminder that good things don't just happen as of right. And when we get stuff, we always assume, well, of course that was always going to happen. But it doesn't always just happen. It requires absolute tenacity and determination and a fair bit of cunning, actually. And if there's one thing I would probably like to be recognised for the record, not Britomart, and not the rail corridors, it's actually getting the CRL through, because I really was grateful to Len Brown. The CRL was always part of Britomart. It was the missing link. And I will always feel grateful to Len Brown that he let me play a small part in actually the delivery on that. And no, we didn't get the funding we wanted, but we at least got it off the ground in the hope that we could negotiate it rather better to the Auckland ratepayers than we did. So what Mike and I decided was we don't write our history properly in Auckland, but we're really good with visual stuff. And I don't know how many times I've seen, and Legacy Auckland City wouldn't pay for it. It actually had to be funded. Eventually, I think they all are rather proud of it. But 2002 saw a group of individuals get that off the ground, and I feel really happy every time I walk past it because it's about vision and it's about guts and determination. And on that, I'd like to pause and reflect on Mike Lee for a moment here today, because we wouldn't have a lot of what we have without Mike. And I know he pissed a lot of you off, but he was just so committed, sometimes at the point that, you know, he lost people along the way, but we all play our part and it weaves together and we get those outcomes that we need. So I want to feel that we do have diversity there. I don't buy into the geographical representation thing because, frankly, you wouldn't have had any of the infrastructure that we've got today if we all looked at it in a parochial way about our wards. This is the time when we need to think regionally, where every one of us sitting around this table has to be a regional councillor. So I don't mind whether it's, if we want to go along the issue of the position, I don't mind that it is Councillor Simpson as the Chair of Finance, but it's obviously got to be somebody who enjoys the Mayor's confidence, because it's his governance structure that we work under and his committee structure that we are here on. But I feel really passionately about this. You might think it's just a token issue. I think this is our chance, and I do feel huge empathy for the people of the West. I really applaud the contribution that we've heard from Linda Cooper and Shane Henderson today. We are precedent setting with this. If it's ever to get off the ground, we have to get it right. Why not Councillor Cooper? You know, why not Councillor Cooper? I implore you to reflect on that, Your Worship, and that you might reconsider, because it's hard to get good things done. And this is our chance. This is our moment to actually shape it and create the right foundations and know that we've all played our part in giving it a good push. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. If I can just speak and reply. Just acknowledging councillors Cooper and Henderson, very conscious of the needs of the Northwest, and has not been well served by government decisions going right back to, you know, the failure to put a busway on the Northwest years ago. And I have to say, I thought when the promise was made to do light rail simultaneously to both areas, I didn't think that was particularly realistic. And actually I had a conversation with Councillor Cooper about that. I don't think she did either. We have to start somewhere, however, and you know, I'll just say this because the conversation went a bit wider than the recommendations in front of us. I absolutely believe you've got to have a rapid transit system that's consistent around the city, and it's got to start with where it's needed most. And I'd still argue it's not just city centre to Mount Roskill, but it's to Mangere, and it's because those huge growth in the Auckland housing program in Mount Roskill, in Onehunga and in Mangere that we're catering for, and connecting people to the work areas of the city centre and the airport precinct. But you know, look, we'll continue to push for that, councillors, and a decent go for the Northwest. But at the moment, we've got to start somewhere, and I think where Michael Wood has started is logical. I should comment. Maybe I commented unfairly. Bill Birch was a hard-working minister on the other side of the House. He worked his guts out, and I hugely admire him for that. I didn't agree with him on Think Big, and if you draw that parallel between Michael Wood and Bill Birch, it's a fair parallel, but I probably wouldn't go beyond the hard work ethic, because neither of them would thank us for that. In regard to Councillor Newman's queries, look, one thing I should have made checked up on. I hope everybody's aware that the chair of the establishment unit has been appointed, Lee Orton, and I know that our councillors in the south who have worked with Lee Orton will have big confidence in Lee, and he did a pretty special job together with his two colleagues on the CCO review. So I think that will help. But the truth is, if I just stray a little bit onto this area again, we do not have the financial ability to meet the costs of something of the scale of light rail, which is going to be even bigger than the City Rail Link. And that's where I believe the argument begins and ends, actually. Yes, we'll have to pick up some of the operating costs, but we don't have the ability to put the capital up. The other question is the question of diversity. And, you know, I hear what people are saying, and I'm sympathetic to that. I did have a young woman on a panel with me down at the Wynyard Quarter last week, decrying the fact that the mayor wasn't a woman, and my response was my only defence, I think, was I said, for heaven's sake, you've got the Prime Minister, you've got the Chief Justice, and you've got the Governor General. You're going to leave the guys with something. And look, it will be the case that there will be women mayors and deputy mayors and chairs of the planning committee, and we have seen progress in terms of the gender balance on this council, and that's good. If I was appointing it on the basis of it being an individual, I would absolutely have wanted to appoint I'm sorry, I'm in reply, councillor. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I would absolutely have made a different decision. But we are doing this on the basis of the positions, and when the people holding those positions change, and we know at least one of those will, because unfortunately the Deputy Mayor has announced that he's not going to run again for council, you know, then that situation will change. And that's all I can say. But the discussion that I had with the Minister was the logic of having the chair of the planning committee, who has the responsibility, the primary responsibility in that area of transport, then that's where we go. So look, it has been moved and seconded, so I'm going to put it to the vote. All those by division, or I can either do it by division, councillor, or if you wish to have your name recorded against by division, it's a request made, so we'll do it by division. So I'll ask Sandra to take the vote on recommendations A and B.
It's only on B.
Okay, well, that's been clarified. So first of all, I'll put recommendation A. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I declare that carried. Would you like your vote counted against that, Deputy Mayor? So I'll now ask Sandra to take the vote on recommendation B by division.
Okay, councillors, you're voting on clause B. Mayor Goff.
Aye.
Councillor Bartley.
Yeah, whatever. For it.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Aye.
Councillor Collins.
Oh.
Councillor Coombe.
Aye.
Councillor Cooper.
Aye.
Councillor Dalton.
Aye.
Councillor Filipina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
No.
Councillor Henderson.
Yes.
Councillor Hills. Councillor Mulholland.
For.
Councillor Newman. Councillor Sayers.
For.
Councillor Simpson. Councillor Stewart. Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson. Councillor Young. So that's carried. 18 votes to 1 with
So-
1 abstention.
So that is declared carried, 18 votes to 1 with 1 abstention, and item 11 has been carried. Item number 12 is summary of governing body information memoranda. Can I have a mover and a seconder for that? Councillor Walker and Councillor Henderson. If there's no discussion on that, I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. 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 To the contrary, no. Carried. There is no extraordinary item, and I declare the meeting closed. And thank councillors very much, and have a good weekend when you get to it.